Hello, welcome back to Kingdom Creator Connected Collective. And today I want to talk to you guys about pivoting. Pivoting. This is something that we see happen and we tend to not to like to admit happens more frequently and more often than we tend to like to admit. Pivoting is a necessity that as you are growing, you will learn that you need to do. Pivoting is when you are in the midst of a process and you recognize that you've reached a point where you can move no longer forward in the direction in which you need to go in. You had a aligned direction in which you desire to go in, but a pivot means you needed to change the direction of which way in which you desired or needed to go. Since I'm a Christian creator, you're going to get this Jesus. There are points in time that you have to stand in that moment and come to the realization, I don't know the answer to this. But because I don't know the answer to this, I need to seek wisdom, guidance, understanding, and clarity so that I can move to the next phase of my creativity journey. Because we all reach a point where we do not know. This means that you have physically run out of options. Wisdom will tell you that I'm going to take the path of logic. Path of logic says that I've ran out of every physical known option. I quit here. Your body has a natural stasis to desire, to want to, at a point where it feels uncomfortable, quit. Okay? So when it feels uncomfortable because it can't see a direction or directionality of which way it should go, it desires to end the process. It's like, well, there's no way out of this, so I'm going to sit here and I'm going to say there's no way out of this. But your biggest breakthrough is just outside of your comfort zone. What does the outside of your comfort zone look like? You turning in a different direction. Perfect example. I remember when I was in New York, I was walking down the street one day and it looked like my path was blocked in the direction that I was going. But I kept walking. I kept walking until I got to the point where I thought that my path was blocked. And you know what was there? There was a turn that redirected and rerouted my direction into another route that brought me out at the end of the same block. But it was an ever so slight quarter turn that had been blocked from visual ability to be able to see. A lot of us are operating in lifestyles where we see false evidence that appears real before us that we give into the fear of and choose not to what? Turn. What is that turn? That is the moment in which you pivot in the direction in which you're supposed to go in. A lot of us will come up with a plan. We have a directive. Maybe we created a strategy, especially for those of us that are creators that we like to plan things out. I like to plan my week out. I like to plan my month out. I like to have my business plan. I like to plan out everything week to week, hour to hour, day to day. But that leaves no room for in the case that something happens that you will be able to move or maneuver around that. So there are some people that literally create an anxiety box by planning themselves out so to the T. Now, me personally, I can't stand planning myself out to that degree. Do I know how to do it? Absolutely. I can plan my entire week out. I have had planners that I've written out the entire plan and structure for my social media and all of this. Every time I ever did that, I'm going to tell you what that did to me. When I did that, it literally caused me a level of anxiety that if I, for one iota, managed to miss 1 hour of that plan, I was pushed into a level of stress that made me feel like I can't do this because for every hour that I was off the schedule, it pushed back other parts of the schedule in my mind, even though the schedule was a schedule I created, meaning it's my schedule. I can change it. A boss didn't create this schedule. I created this schedule. But because it was written down, there's a scripture in the Bible that says in Habakkuk 2:2, write the vision, make it plain on tablets for runners to go and get. If you write it down, sometimes it gives you such a level of accountability to that it makes it hard that when you need to pivot, your brain wants to collapse because it's like, oh my God, I just wrote this entire schedule out and now I don't follow it. This is why 95% of the time, I don't write no schedules out. I have a mental schedule that I keep that is the same thing, but it's mental. And the reason I keep it mental is because if the direction of the schedule, I don't leave the hour that I'm supposed to leave. I plan to leave at 12, don't leave till 3. I lose 3 hours of my processing and work time, so on and so forth. I'm not over here freaking out. Oh my God, I lost 3 hours. Oh my God, I could have got so much more done. Oh my God, blah, blah, blah. Pivot. But when I don't see a schedule, my brain says, I just adjust to the time frame I got and do as much as I can in the time that I got to work with. What does that look like? Me redirecting the amount of work that I need to get done. And in some cases, I'll get more done in the shorter time frame than I thought I would have had I had the time that I was thinking that I was going to initially have. Now, who's to say that I couldn't have gotten twice the work done? But sometimes you have to be able to adjust on a dime. Why am I saying this? In a lot of cases, as you are growing throughout time, you're building, there's always going to be a phase where you're going to have to pivot. It's just part of life. You're going to reach a point that life going to be life and something going to come up and it's going to be a scenario. I thought I was going in this direction, but I'm going in that direction and I can't change that. So because I can't change that, I have to adjust, let go of, release, realign, re-strategize, prepare. Well, if this is what I'm going to do, this is how I align it. If this is what I'm assuming, then this is how I'm going to align it. So you must be able to pivot at the drop of a dime. Why am I saying this? Currently, I've had an experience where I needed to recently pivot. I was running my podcast on one platform. I had 3 podcasts. All of them I was growing organically in one location. I had gotten used to the promotional schedule and all of the stuff that I was doing. I was doing this seasonally for a 3-year period. I added on with every year, I added a new podcast. So I went from the first year having 1 podcast, the second year having 2 podcasts, the third year I had given the first podcast a 2-year-long break, and I just restated that podcast only to find out that the platform has changed all its rules and I had to pivot. So because of the rule changes, what I was used to doing on the platform that I had been cultivating my podcast, now I have to change direction. With this change in direction, there's got to be a shift. With that shift, I'm going to need to transition, transform, and determine what do I want to do. Do I want to keep the podcast? Do I want to change the podcast? Do I want to add to this podcast? Do I want to transform this podcast? Do I want to keep it as it is, or do I want to align it in a different way? You're going to get this Jesus. God will give you a way of escape. There's always a new direction, which looks like a pivot that you're going to have to shift into that may be at the last 11th hour. You're sitting there looking at this thing and trying to figure, oh my God, I'm about to lose everything. I can't work on this podcast no more. It's the end of this podcast. Oh my goodness. And then you get an idea. What if I moved it to somewhere else? There are many platforms that allow you the ability to move the podcast somewhere else. There are many of you that you're going to start something. And I need you to hear me clearly. You're going to start something. I don't know what your thing is. Put your thing in this space. You're going to start something. You're going to develop that thing. That thing's going to run smoothly for a season. But at a particular point in time, you're going to reach a point that you will need to shift. What's going to happen? You're going to outgrow the place in which you built it on. The fulfillment properties are not going to be able to continue to maintain whatever it was that you were building. You might want to expand your ability to do something. There might be certain rules, laws, or regulations that, to the level in which you want to grow that thing, the limitation surrounding that platform, surrounding that thing, surrounding what it is that you created, you might have gotten good follower base in that platform, and you get to a point where you're like, oh, I don't want to lose my followers at this particular platform. But at the end of the day, you need to take your product, take your service, take whatever it is to a new pivot point. I will never forget, I was watching a program on MPT, and they were talking about this person had started a bakery business, and they baked biscuits, but they reached a point that their fulfillment center could no longer fulfill the orders, so they needed to move in a quick basis to be able to procure the ability to fulfill 3 different order systems, because they had gotten an increase of batch orders. And because they had that increase of batch orders, they needed to get a higher fulfillment system. Now, not to say that they couldn't find it, they were quickly able to find it, but it does take time to shift. I've seen this happen with other people. There's a young woman I follow. She used to do just hair related type stuff for natural hair. And she created her own product, but when she realized that she needed to have a bigger fulfillment center, they had to move everything from one location to another location. She had to pivot real quick, because what ended up happening is they thought they had set it up that the launch for their next product was going to happen right after they moved into their next location. But some weird thing happened that upon the shipment of the last set of orders from their previous products were delayed. And upon that happening, they were trying to make sure that they fulfilled those previous orders in the middle of making sure that they packed up everything from their first factory, moving it to the second factory. The new launch was delayed, meaning the launch date happened, but the products weren't able to come out because people had pre-ordered the products for the date that it was supposed to launch. But due to the fact that the fulfillment center wasn't ready, that they literally were packing orders and shipping out between 2 factories at the same time, and things were getting delayed. Shipments were delayed. It was a big mess. I don't want this to scare you, but it needs to be said that you have to be able and willing to pivot whatever it is that you need to create. What I always will tell you, I did a podcast on this where I literally talked about the fact that there are things that are going to happen that you need to, in the midst of the frenzy of these shifts happening, you have to pause, recognize you are okay. You are not in trouble. There's no pain here. You have to recognize that you're not going to get caught up in the frenzy of the anxiety of what's happening, but you're going to breathe through it and recognize the steps that need to be taken and take those steps. Don't focus on the pressure of the time limit. Time is what makes it harder for you to focus in the time of a shift in the first place. You're thinking either you have to move quicker because you're trying to get ahead of a time frame, or you need to move slower to make sure that you're getting all of your ducks in a row, or you're stuck in that in-between place where you're not moving at all because you're in a pause where you're trying to determine what steps need to be taken. Because a lot of people in a season of pivot, you get to a place, I don't know what to do. Oh my God, I don't understand this. Oh my God, I don't know what steps to take. Oh my God, I'm confused. Oh my God, oh God, oh God. You're not confused. You know what you need to do. And some of you knew what you needed to do before you got real confused. You knew what it was, but what it was is your internal clock is afraid of pivoting. So because your internal clock is afraid of pivoting, it doesn't want to move in the direction that it already knows the plan to move there. It actually knew that it needed to move there in the first place. It just didn't want to take the steps. So there is a level of physical resistance coming up against the manifestation of the movement forward into that place that you need to pivot into in order for this thing to fall into proper alignment, in order for you to continue to move forward. Because nobody likes having to shift. Nobody likes having to rearrange things. Nobody likes having to move. Nobody likes it. But if you're wise and you catch on to the fact of the shift, you will have enough time to move. But in that moment of pivot, you will probably have a month, 2 months to be able to shift into something new. The issue, and I need you to pay attention to this. The issue is a lot of us get into a moment. I'm confused. You were not confused when you figured it out first. The confusion came in because you had anxiety because you didn't want to take the steps to go into the process of actually moving that thing into the alignment of where it needed to go. That's the whole confusion. You physically don't want to have to do the work. This is something I also find when I'm talking about spiritual stuff on my other channel, that people don't want to do the process of the work needed internally to make sure that the external result comes to pass the way that they desire. So they get into that, oh, I'm confused. Well, I'm this. It's nothing wrong with you. You know exactly what you need to do. Go back, look at my video. You know what you need to do. Do it. Okay? It's, you know. But when it comes to a point in time where you need to pivot, a lot of us don't want to go through the process of pivoting because that means disassembling what you've created. And in some cases, it may not involve going through the level of steps in which you think you have to go through in order to move that thing. For some, it's a case where you just simply are in a state of mind where the stress of what you created makes you feel like I got to do all this in order to move it somewhere else. But we live in a digital world. In some cases, it's just, can you get this link and move that link over there? There you go. Now, for physical procurement of products, you may have to change your service provider, meaning if you had all your products being created by this service that may have been a customizable on-demand service, and now you got to move it to a factory where they have to make the product from scratch, then yeah, what has to happen there is you have to worry about bottles, you have to worry about where your production is coming from, where the ingredients and all of that kind of stuff. Are you using the exact same ingredients? Are you changing up the formula? If that's the case, you need to make sure that your new factory can receive the products in order for them to make the product. I remember years ago, back when I was doing fashion design, I was watching Kimora Simmons do a event, and it was the day of her fashion show. They make their fashion shows look awesome on them television programs, but they don't tell you what goes on behind closed doors when it's the day of the fashion show and the truck didn't arrive with the clothes yet. It's like, the show starts at 10 in the morning. It's 6. We don't have any clothes. The models are arriving, but we don't have any clothes to put on the models yet. We don't have the jewelry yet. We don't have the, you know how many video television shows I've seen like that? It's like, we don't have the stuff yet to do what it is that we're supposed to do. Let's go to musicians and concert. It's raining. We can't do the show until it stops raining. Yeah, that. It's a risk for that to happen. So they have to sit out the rain for 2 whole hours before they can come on stage and actually perform. So that is a 2 hour delay. Then they still only got the amount of time that they were supposed to be on that stage, but the 2 hour delay, which means because of that 2 hour delay, guess what? They don't get to go home until that 2 hours is over. So where they were planning to be done with the show and everything that was to follow it is pushed back 2 hours. That means meet and greets for 2 hours. That means all that 2 hours. 2 hours. 2 hours. 2 hours. Everything pushed back 2 hours. So meet and greets, interviews, panels, all that 2 hours. Then they ain't getting home. If they initially weren't getting home till 2 o'clock in the morning, that means they ain't getting home till 4. So you got to be able to pivot at the drop of a dime. Let's say you're a body butter company and you have to change your shipping arrangements. You have to recognize when you have to pivot. But the most important thing is recognizing in the beginning of the process the weight of what it is that you're developing. Do not put more weight on yourself. And a lot of us content creators have a tendency to do this. And I see it happen more often than not, that what will happen is we will put way too much on our plate that we know we cannot consume. Okay? Knowing that we cannot consume all of this that we have put on our plate, we still try to eat like everybody else. The people that you're watching that are the top influencers, they got teams that they pay, that they got money to pay those teams. But the little influencer always tries to come in at the rate of the high influencer, and then they start becoming transactional and are crushed under the weight of their responsibility to maintain looking like they got it together. You're supposed to start at the bottom and grow. Stop trying to keep up with the Joneses of the creators that have everything put in order. Stop putting the 15 things on your plate when you know you can't maintain nor manage all of that stuff. Stop doing it. Because what ends up happening is you start to get crushed under the weight, and then you end up what? Having to pivot, because either you're going to end up being crushed under the weight and lose everything, or you're going to have to quickly pivot and make arrangements to properly realign yourself with what's supposed to fit you in the season that you're actually walking in. When you chase things that are outside of the range of the season that you're in, what will end up happening is you will burn the wheels out of what it is that you are creating at that time. And in you burning the wheels out from under you, you end up in a state where you're not going to be able to keep up with that. So because you're burning the wheels out, you end up frustrated, angry, tired, and having an emotional breakdown. Why? Because you put too much weight on yourself and you're collapsing under the weight of a bigger issue that actually has nothing to do with your business at all. It has something to do with something that you had going on within you that made you feel that you had to chase and be that person that everyone else was, and you wanted to look like the same thing as everybody else, but you weren't supposed to be up there in the first place. Not to say that you're never supposed to be up there, but you have to know what works for you. And in you understanding what works for you, you don't put the weight on yourself. How do you understand what works for you? Sit down and determine what it is that you like, you don't like. Do you like weight like that? Do you like managing a team? Do you want to manage a team? Do you want to build to that degree? What is the model that works best for you? If you don't want to manage a team and you don't want to have that level of capacity, then what does it look like to have a business and not manage a team? How are you going to, as things grow, as things expand, as things pivot, are you doing what you want to do or what you see everybody else in your industry doing? So because that's what everyone else in the industry is doing, that you're going to do the same thing. You need to determine off the rip, off the cuff, what is it that I like? Why am I in this industry? What is it that I wanted to do to create my own pathway so that I am differentiated? And it's funny, I had a dream this morning where I saw somebody that was dressed like another entertainer, and they were almost identically dressed. And it's that element, do you want to be a carbon copy of somebody? Or do you want to create your own pathway? The people that become legends and legendary are not the ones that mimic the same formula as everybody else. It's the ones that create their own path, their own ways, and create something new, new sound, new look, new, something that nobody's seen before, because once it's new, then they create their own way. The problem is, in certain industries, people will create the path and other people will start to follow it and or try to undergird, snatch, or try to come out with it before. And this happens in every industry. I remember years ago when I was in fashion courses, and the person was talking about the fact that there are high-end designers that will go to the low-end boutique places and literally look into the windows of these no-name boutiques that have yet to become famous for whatever it is, and they would look and steal their ideas of what they saw in the window. And once they saw what they saw in the window, whatever was new, whatever was something they had never seen done before, they take it back to the drawing board, and because they could afford to take it to their team and create it and put it on a runway, the little guy that actually created, never knowing this person walked through their street, they knocked them off. And they never knew that they should have been being paid for that knockoff. So this happens in the industries, this happens in fashion, this happens in music, it happens often. But even if it does happen, what do you have to do? You have to pivot. So these are places that you have to understand that independence is important. But if you desire to go independent in any capacity in the midst of your pivoting, because understand something. When you look at it like this, if you're underneath a label, a production company, and or a well-known system, in comparison to being independent, there are pros to being underneath of a label and all of these kinds of things in whatever capacity of whatever it is that you're doing. Yes, but there are rules, laws, authorities, sanctions, directives, ownership issues, all of these things that are going to put a creative stifling on what it is that you have and what it is you're trying to create. But independence, there's a different kind of weight. That means you got to manage teams. That means you got to manage this. That means you got to manage that. You got to manage this. You got to take care of and have control over all of this. But you have to make that determination that you coming into the creativity of what it is that you're desiring to create, you pivot at the beginning, meaning you recognize what you want and what you're comfortable with doing from the get-go. So you're not in the corner crying your eyes out 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 4 years down the line before you hit the 5-year mark, sitting there in the corner with pulling your hair out trying to say, oh my God, I put too much weight on myself. If you did it right in the beginning by growing it with a solid foundation and understanding, yes, there are going to be points of pivot as growth comes. All you can do is prepare knowing that when that pivot comes, at the very least, you know, because you've understood this is what I'm comfortable with. This is the direction that we're going. This is the type of stuff. Help will come in to be able to bless you in order to help you during the midst of that pivot and that transition. But when you are prepared, whether help comes or whether help does not come, you have a game plan. It's a theory that I heard another YouTuber say, where she talked about plan, rest, run, because you never know when you're going to need to shift. You never want to know when you need to recognize that you're going to have to pivot, but you plan ahead of time for whichever route of pivot you may need to go, whether you get the opportunity and you need to quickly shift into the opportunity, or whether you're going to have to pivot to move and rearrange something. You shift as the situation calls for you to make those shifts. With that pivot, you're going to transition, be transformed. I don't care whether you are doing music. I don't care whether you got a podcast. I don't care whether you're running a bakery and you got